Story Time with Stephanie Storey.
Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Stephanie Storey, and this is Story Time. My guest today is a professor of history and director of women's and gender studies at Rowan University in New Jersey, as well as the author of a new book called Ballet Class, An American History. Welcome to the show, Dr. Melissa Klapper.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for the team story time you've been doing, Stephanie. I'm delighted to be here. I'll just show you everybody. I don't know if you're going to see it so well with the color. Ballet Class, An American History.
There you go. Yes.
You go.
I oftentimes have the book behind me, but I haven't had a chance to get this one yet. I've just read the introduction. It looks so great. I'm actually really excited about talking about this because I was one of the little girls in ballet class when I was a kid, right? We were all put in there. So one, were you also one of the little girls forced to go off to ballet class? I didn't personally like it very much. And two, why did you decide to tackle this subject matter?
Well, I'm going to answer those both at the same time, which is to say that, yes, I did take ballet class starting from the time I was 4. I don't remember now, and neither does my mother remember, whether it was her idea or mine, but I loved it. I wasn't like you. I loved it. And I stayed in ballet class all the way through the end of high school. So I took ballet class for 14 years, which is a long time for someone who had absolutely no professional aspiration nor professional level talent. So that's a long time to take ballet class for someone who became competent in the way that one does, doing the same kind of thing 2 or 3 times a week for 14 years. You learn some things, but it was never because I wanted to be a dancer. But I did always just love ballet. It was an important part of my childhood and my adolescence. It was my only extracurricular activity, really, after, outside of school, except for 3 misbegotten years of violin playing, I was a great ballet dancer compared to a violinist. And I just, as a result of this, and I think a lot of people had this experience, even when they didn't take ballet class for so long, I just developed a lifetime attachment to ballet. I love to go to the ballet. I love to read about ballet. I love to watch ballerinas, male dancers. I just have always been really fascinated by and interested in ballet. So that's one answer to the question, why write a book about ballet class? So that's the personal answer. The professional answer is equally important. And that is that one of my 2 scholarly hats that I wear is that I'm a historian of childhood and youth in America. I also write about American Jewish women's history. That's my other area of expertise. But I got in on the ground floor of a new field, that was new about 25 years ago, the history of childhood in America. And so I've written 2 of my 3 books that have some element of children's history in them. And so that's why else I was interested in ballet class. I was thinking about, I had this personal experience, but of course, as you well know, literally millions of American children have taken ballet class over the 20th century, and no one had written about it. And I like to write about things no one ever wrote about before. So it's a combination of my personal passion for ballet with my professional interest as a historian of childhood, and thus a book about not ballet as an art form, but ballet class. It's a kind of social history from the ground up of all those children who took ballet and all the regular teachers who taught them, not the people at the fanciest ballet studios, but the people who ran storefront studios like the one I went to. So that's really where my interest in this topic came from. And I tried in the book to keep the focus on so-called ordinary children as much as possible. I do also, of course, have to treat the history of ballet in America as an art form, but the focus for me is really on the kind of ordinary social experience of ballet class for the masses.
Okay, this really interested me when you first sent me the introduction and I was reading over it and I was thinking about this topic, because so many people do focus on the art form and the people who go after it and they're at the peak of their career. I certainly do it with the guys I write about in art, right? I look at the top.
Right.
It's so interesting to me that you did not, that wasn't your focus. Your focus were on the people, the girls who did it young as a recreational outlet, the moms who sent them. Why specifically were you looking into that part of ballet?
Okay. Well, first, I just want to add one addendum right up top, which is that lots of boys took ballet class too, not just girls.
Yeah, I know.
Of course,
I'll ask about that.
Of course, it would be silly to say that as many boys as girls took ballet class. I'm not going to contend that. That would be silly. But it is important, I think, to just keep that in mind. It's also because of my background as a social history person. I'm interested in history from the bottom up, not from the top down. Most people, let's face it, most of us are bottom up people. Most of us are not generals. We're not presidents of the United States. We're not prima ballerinas. We're not the artists that the Pope calls to do the Sistine Chapel, right? That's not who most of us are. Most of us are the people holding the ladder. And so I'm interested in those people, the people who hold the ladder and clean up the messes and just, our lives, you and I think would be happy to say our lives have value, even if we never get to the top of something. And so do the lives of all the people in the past who didn't become the elite in society. And so the history of childhood as a discipline is really rooted in that perspective, that even people who don't seem to have a lot of power, like children, still have lives of meaning and value, something that's worth studying. So I never for a moment considered writing a book about the professionals. Think how few professional ballet dancers there have been in America, as opposed to the, again, millions of children who have taken ballet class at least for a while. And I'm more interested in that kind of mass experience and how it connects to other kind of cultural forms in America. And that's just the experience of ordinary childhood, where in a family like mine, for instance, and many others, no one really even knows why exactly, but 4-year-old kids go to ballet class. Like, how does that happen? That's what I'm interested in. The people who become professionals all had that experience too when they were 3 and 4. Somebody decided they should start ballet class. No one can tell looking at a 3-year-old who's going to make it to the top. They all start somewhere. But the pipeline gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower, and I'm interested in the wider perspective.
Okay, why did so many of us take ballet as kids, whether we were interested or not, I was just taller than everybody else, so very awkward, which is why I started this out by saying I didn't like it, because I had no aptitude for it. I was so out of touch with my own body. But so why did so many of us land there? What did you find out?
Well, I think that's because ballet has been part of American culture for well over 100 years now. There was ballet in America well before the late 19th century, but that's kind of the moment when ballet became somewhat more popular. There are a few moments in American history when ballet became part of mass culture. One is during the period right before, during, and right after World War I, when Russian dancers started to tour in the United States. So again, there is an older history. There were French dancers who toured before that, but it's really when people like Anna Pavlova start showing up in the United States. So here's the elite, right? If people only know one ballet dancer's name, they might know Anna Pavlova, for a woman anyway. For a man, they might know Baryshnikov, but for a woman, they'll know Anna Pavlova. And she, between 1910 and 1925, toured the United States, not continuously, but at least once every year. And she performed all over the country. And she performed in high cultural environments like opera houses, and she also performed in barns that were turned into theaters. And so every place she went, so many Americans actually then had access, and she wasn't the only one. In fact, right before World War I, in the summer, I think it was 1911, there were so many Russian dancers touring the United States that the Tsar couldn't have his usual ballet season at his summer palace. Before the Russian Revolution, of course. So it was popular, and it was popular and accessible, not just to very wealthy people. So that's one moment when more Americans, and in what to me is this very American way, Americans were like, oh, this is beautiful. I bet we could do it too. Let's send our kids to class. Which in Russia and in France, for instance, the two centers of ballet at the time, was not how it worked. You had to be a very talented kid. You had to get into the state-supported school. There was no such thing as recreational ballet class in many other countries. But in the United States, there's this can-do attitude, and also an attitude of, if I want it and I can pay for it, I can have it. And so ballet class began to develop then. And then, they continued, but the next big moment of spreading widely was really after World War II, during the baby boom, when more and more American families were entering the middle class and had enough money to send their kids for extracurricular activities. And then ballet really took off, and it was seen as a class marker, kind of class status thing. And not just for white middle-class families, actually. So there's a whole chapter in the book about race in ballet. It's a theme throughout. African-American families also, and immigrant families throughout this period kind of used ballet to say something about themselves and their class status and their, what scholars kind of call the politics of respectability. But even without the highfalutin language, the idea that, you know, you get a certain amount of grace and poise and charm from ballet class. And it didn't matter. Most of these families would have been upset if their kids wanted to be professionals. That's not what they were going for. They wanted the status that went with it. And so from that point on, ballet is just everywhere. And then it becomes a family tradition. If your mother did it and your grandmother did it, why shouldn't you do it? Which was, again, the case in my family.
Yeah, I started to say, I don't think my mother wanted me to become a ballerina. She had just done ballet, and it was just part of what you do.
Right.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that, yes, there were boys who took ballet. And I know, like, I'm aware of this, although I don't think there was one in my ballet class. But I'm aware that this is true. But it was the majority of little girls. That's the majority of the people who took it, right? Like, did it inform the way we saw ourselves as women, or you're a gender studies professor? How did it inform women in this country?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, because from those early days of Anna Pavlova types, ballerinas and ballet got associated with a certain kind of femininity and a kind of glamour, which is related to the charm and the grace and the poise that regular kids were supposed to get. You know, they would learn to be feminine. There are so many stories of people who became professional dancers whose parents, usually their mothers, originally put them in ballet class because they were tomboys. And they were like, oh, we're going to send this kid up to ballet class, and then she'll, you know, be less of a tomboy. In the days when that was a bad thing to be, you know. Of course, not that it was ever a bad thing to be, but there was cultural ideas around that. So there definitely were always more girls, but there were also always boys in ballet class. And the number has been just growing steadily over, you know, it would be a straight line up if we were to mark it over the 20th century. First of all, anyone who's ever been to a ballet, take the Nutcracker, for instance. Right? The Nutcracker is kind of the gateway drug to ballet. More Americans have seen the Nutcracker than any other ballet. It's wildly popular, produced every year around the holiday time in the United States, not elsewhere. There's tons of children on stage, and, you know, the soldiers and the mice are often boys. They sometimes have been girls dressed as boys, that's true, but in certainly more recent years, there are boys dancing on stage. Everyone knows there are male ballet dancers, and there have been issues around this. There's been a stigma in America in particular around male dancers, and kind of accusations of homosexuality as if being gay is a bad thing, but of course in earlier generations it was seen that way, you know. So there's been a lot of stigma around boys who dance, but there always have been those who wanted to, and you can see it by looking through the archives of studios like I did, looking in Dance Magazine. Sometimes you read these letters that kids would write in, the boys would write into Dance Magazine asking, you know, how can I prove that I'm a real man even though I'm a dancer? So in the 50s, the advice they often got was to punch somebody. You know, use violence, that's manly. I would like to think that is no longer the advice. But what you see now, what you see more recently, is this real emphasis, not even recently, since at least the 70s, a real emphasis on dancing as athletic, as dancing as a sport.
Oh, okay.
And that was, you know, there were a lot of comparisons, there were TV shows. You'd have TV shows with people like Sugar Ray Leonard, the boxer, and Eddie Villela, the dancer, and Dick Button, the figure skater, all in the same show, showing that anything that men do can be athletic. There's also been some cultural moments that helped boys in ballet. I don't know if you remember the movie Billy Elliot. Yeah, about the coal miner's son, you know, from the north of England, who just wants to be a dancer, and his family is horrified, and the community is appalled, and, you know, but he has helped, and sorry folks, spoiler alert, he makes it. After that movie came out, the number of boys applying to the Royal Ballet School in London actually outnumbered the girls for the following year. And it was a major cultural shift, both in the United States and in England. Way more boys started taking ballet class. So it's like with anything else, if you see it, you can be it. So representation is really important. And I think the TV shows lately, some of the dance TV shows, I have feelings about those, but what they're good about is they have male dancers. You watch So You Think You Can Dance, and it's full of male dancers, and the ones who have ballet training, often it's noticeable and they do really well, and the judges comment on it. And that too, for some little boys, makes it okay to want to be a dancer, and even for their families makes it okay. So there's been a real shift. It's still not equal, but I don't think there's the same kind, the stigma is not as bad or as intense as it used to be.
It's so funny because a few times during this conversation, you've talked about like current dance classes, and probably because I took them as a kid and because I don't have children, so I'm not currently looking at kids in dance class. I think of it more in a historical way than something that's still a really popular thing. Are kids still really going to ballet classes? What's happening now with it?
Yes, so it's funny that you say that, because I'm talking about the current situation when, of course, I'm a historian. But yes, kids still go to ballet class. There's something else that has to do with gender that has had an impact, though, on who goes to ballet class and how and why, is something that it might not seem on the surface like it's related to ballet at all, and that's Title IX. So Title IX in 1972 is a federal law that prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex in federally funded institutions, which includes schools. Like, just long story short, it includes schools and colleges and universities. It had many effects, but one of the effects was that it mandated that schools had to provide sports for girls. Mm-hmm. And after Title IX, when girls could choose, they weren't as slotted into the so-called girly activities like ballet or piano playing or, I don't know, gymnastics or figure skating. Now they could go play softball and soccer. They did in droves. And that had a real depressing, in the sense of depressing the numbers, impact on dance class, not just ballet, but on all kinds of dance class, because a lot of girls didn't want to be there and they'd rather be doing other things. And now the law was requiring that those things be available. And so that had that in the late 70s and through a lot of the 80s, there were fewer kids in general in dance classes. However, one of the ways that the dance world in general, including ballet, fought back was to say, all right, you want something where there's prizes and competition and athleticism and trophies, we'll start a competition culture within the dance world. And that's when dance competitions started really popping up. And in ballet in particular, there were no ballet competitions except for professionals. When I was in ballet class in the late 70s through the mid 80s, there was no such thing as a ballet competition, except for people like Baryshnikov. Right. But now you'd be hard pressed to find a studio that doesn't participate in competitions. So it's become more like a sport, and that attracted back some of the girls who had left because they wanted something more athletic or competitive. So ballet class is always tied to currents of American culture. And that's something that I just found really fascinating as I was working on the book.
Always tied to currents of American culture. That's really interesting. I was going to ask, and I'll ask it in this context, that you're a historian, you've studied kids for a long time, you've studied all of this, you've studied gender for a long time. What was the most surprising thing while you were actually doing the research into this particular book? Not that you found out 20 years ago that you happened to include, but something that when you were really doing research into this book, what was the most interesting thing you learned about American culture that you learned by studying ballet?
Something that I found really fascinating was the incredible vitriolic conflict between the worlds of ballet and modern dance in the early 20th century. It's just something I didn't know about. I already knew quite a bit about the history of ballet because I've been obsessed with it since I was a child, and I've read about it all my life, really all my life. But I never did modern dance. I actually don't see a lot of modern dance. I usually choose ballet performances. I just was not as familiar. And it turns out that in the United States in the 20s and the 30s, and even past that, as modern dance was developing and saw itself as this very American art form, there was a huge amount of conflict. Modern dancers tried to differentiate themselves from ballet dancers by saying, oh, that's so old world and European. We new vigorous Americans, we don't want any of that garbage. What we don't want anything that has to do with royalty and courts, which is of course where ballet started. What we want is vigorous American dancing. And the things they said about each other, it was a two-way street, are hilarious to me and to us, I think now. They're really funny, but they weren't funny at the time. And that was just something I knew absolutely nothing about. So that was one thing that I really enjoyed learning about. And it's funny. The material in the book, I would like to think the material in the book about that is funny because the things they said about each other, and it was really serious. Like they thought they were standing for the future of art. So they took themselves very seriously.
Awesome. I never would have guessed there was a big West Side Story style battle.
Oh, it really was.
And the ballet dancers. Yeah. So I am taking an acting class on Zoom. Yeah. And acting is a very in-person type of craft. Do you think that in this moment of the COVID-19 pandemic and quarantine and all of that, do you think there are ballet classes still somehow going on?
Oh, there absolutely are. I mean, I'm familiar with a bunch of them. There are ballet classes every day of every conceivable kind. Many ballet teachers are trying to replace some of their income by charging for these classes. The professional companies are all having group ballet classes online every day. I mean, I couldn't get into it, but the New York City Ballet has its company class every day online. People log in from wherever they are. I have a dear friend who helped me with this book a little bit, a wonderful dancer, former professional dancer named Barry Carolus, and he is in this small apartment in Queens, and he has this little mat, and he holds onto the doorknob for his bar. Doesn't have a lot of space, but professional dancers cannot stop dancing because their bodies will never come back from it. The recreational classes are also happening. The studio that I went to when I went back to ballet class while writing this book is having multiple classes every week. And they're, and as they should be, they're charging for it. I mean, this is, it's their business. That's how they're trying to keep their business up. But I think you could probably find free ballet classes too. I haven't looked, but they're everywhere because it's a discipline. It's like people wouldn't stop doing yoga. So people who take ballet are not going to stop doing ballet. It's their, it's their life, it's their discipline, it's their artistry, it's their expression. And I think, a lot of those people started when they were children. And that's, again, where this book comes in. It has a lifelong impact. Not everyone's going to take ballet class his or her whole life, but they might be interested in it and read a book about it or go to a movie about it or subscribe to their local ballet company. I think it really has, an outsized impact on people because ballet is so much a part of the culture.
What's the one thing that you wish readers or people at home knew about why ballet is important to their lives now, like why we should know more about it or go to more of it or just have a better awareness of it?
Well, I think ballet is of course it's dance, but it's other things as well, especially if you're talking about professional performances. Ballet is art, it's music, it's dance, it's all of those things at once. Some of the greatest artists of the 20th century, names everybody knows, like Picasso, for instance, designed sets for ballets in the earlier part of the 20th century. I mean, modernism was a creation, it's not just a creation of painting or of sculpture, but also of dance. Mm-hmm. I'll even give the modern dancers credit for that too. So I think ballet is this multi-dimensional artistic experience that can only be good for everybody. Not everyone's going to like everything he or she sees. Not all ballet is full of tutus and swans. That's a very reductionist way to think about it. But you can get that too if you want it. And so I think as a kind of, in the way that I believe that art should be of some kind should be in everybody's life, ballet provides multiple dimensions of that art. And then there's also something about the collective experience of seeing something beautiful or wondrous that I think is good for everyone. So that's in terms of professional ballet. In terms of ballet class, I think it also has something to offer everybody. You learn musicality. Even if you're not particularly graceful, you still learn your body a little bit more. Helps people become more body aware. You learn a little musicality. You learn a little body control. You learn discipline and a certain amount of grace. Different people will get different things out of it, but all of those things will take you through life no matter what you're going to do. And I think that's why there's still an appeal. And then there's some people who just think that they're going to end up being the next Baryshnikov or Pavlova. More power to them. Good luck. But that's not the common experience. And the other thing I just want to add about that is that the other side of that, we've been talking almost entirely about the students who took ballet class, but there's also the teachers who are a big part of my book. And a lot of, what's really important about that from a women's history perspective is that here you have, generation after generation, many ballet teachers, particularly recreational teachers in smaller studios, were women. These were business women, they were professionals, they were trained, they were talented. They had to do all kinds of things in eras when it wasn't so expected that a woman would do any of that. They were often community leaders, in their civic communities. And here's all these women, they're entrepreneurs. No one ever thinks about them. And now as an adult, I kind of wish I knew more about what Miss Wanda, my first teacher, what was she thinking? What was she like? I don't really know it. And I really, I have admiration. Of course, there were men in those positions too, but for women, it was this kind of job category that allowed for a professionalism and an artistry and a skill that not everybody could do. And we should know more about them too.
I love this. Like I said, as a kid, ballet was not necessarily my cup of tea. just because I wasn't physically cut out for it. Nothing against ballet. I like going to the ballet, just personally doing it. And this conversation has really made me rethink about it and change my lens already a little bit. So when I read, I'm now really looking forward to reading Ballet Class. So thank you. This is really fascinating material. I didn't expect it to have so many different avenues to think about. And the teachers, being an avenue for women to be business leaders is fascinating.
And also another thing that I spend a lot of time talking about kind of girl culture and kind of children's culture in ballet, and think about ballet books. Even kids who never take a ballet class still have some idea of what it looks like because there's ballet in so many books. You know, and so I actually have most of a chapter that's just about ballet books. There's the classics like Ballet Shoes by Noel Streatfeild. But there are literally hundreds, thousands. I mean, when I did a count for the book, there were over 4,000 ballet titles for children. You know, some date in April 3 years ago or whatever it was, there are thousands and thousands of ballet books for kids. And so that means that a lot of people there's this wide exposure to ballet, whether or not someone takes class, but it also creates a population of kids who think, oh, I'd like to take a class because I read a book about it and I saw what it was like. And what's great about what's happened lately in children's books for ballet is that they have a much wider kind of representation. It's not just white middle class girls. Whoopi Goldberg, for instance, with a co-author, has a series called Sugar Plum Ballerinas that's set in Harlem, and everybody, teachers, parents, students, they're all people of color. It's fabulous. You know, and that's really important because I do, you know, the stereotype of the blonde girl, middle class girl taking ballet is there, and I'm not going to say it wasn't real, but lots of other kids always did, and particularly for African American kids who until the 60s were kept out and were in segregated ballet studios. That's a whole other story, the segregated ballet studios. You know, it's really important that now children have access to, you know, books and representation that's much more diverse than used to be the case. Ballet still has some ways to go in terms of diversity, but there's been huge improvements, and that's worth noting, as well as the continued need for you know, accessibility and access there.
Yeah, I love it that even in our day and age when things we're trying to improve things on many fronts, including racial equality and gender equality. You know, I love it that ballet's in it, you know, that those differences are being seen, even in something that, as you said, sort of stereotypically, I felt like it was, you know, this human being in ballet. So I love it that that's even being opened up there. Thank you, Melissa, for this fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it. Hold up the book again. There we go. Look, Ballet Class.
Sorry, I'm having,
American
you can tell I have spatial issues. I can't get it through it. There you go. Ballet Class in American History. It's available at, you know, Amazon, from Oxford University Press, and anywhere books are sold.
Excellent. And I'll throw up a still of it too, so we can all get a nice look at it. And we can all go out and buy it and read about the history of ballet in this country. Thank you, Melissa, for all of the work you do and
thank you
for all of the work you're doing teaching during this crazy, crazy time.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to you for highlighting the work that authors do. You know, I know as an author yourself, you appreciate how long it can take to write a book and the work that goes into it. And, you know, for all of us who just had books published and then had all of our events canceled, it's really, you know, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Oh, good. Well, any tiny thing any of us can do to get out and continue to do what we all do. Best of luck with everything, Melissa. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and see you next time. Bye.
Story time virtually.